Okay, so now that we are live, um, recruiters, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think that was probably as close as I could get to a little bit of a subtitle because there are some really, really good recruiters. You've all likely encountered some bad ones. And then there's things going on behind the scenes that you may not be aware of. And that's, I think, where a lot of this kind of frustration and just kind of, I guess, annoyance, can kind of come from. So let's start out with some memes. This may not be you right now, but it will soon become you as you start to gain more and more experience. You are probably getting some recruiters who are reaching out, but at a certain point, it is almost going to get annoying. This is also another really fun one because whether it's now or later in your career, you are going to have recruiters who essentially spam you with a message based on a role that they think is a quote unquote good fit. And you're thinking to yourself, did you even read my profile? Did you even look at my resume? That's always just fun because you're like, you've clearly shown your lack of experience and knowledge with that message. And then finally, this is likely what you're experiencing, which is a recruiter tells you that they're interested in talking to you, tells you that you sound like you might be a good fit, tells you that they're going to pass your resume along. And then all of a sudden, they've disappeared. They've gone from being your best friend to somebody who, you maybe went to high school and took a class with, but if you pass them on the street, they would never recognize who you are. And we'll kind of go a little bit farther into this, but I think the first thing that we want to cover, and I'd like to, kind of help people get an idea of is one, once again, recruiters are humans. Humans do not often like uncomfortable conversations. So if you're not the right fit and they don't know how to properly communicate that to you, they could end up taking the easy road, which is I'm going to talk to somebody else. I'm going to blame it on somebody else, or I'm going to say, and I'm going to, maybe shoot you an email instead of doing it over the phone. Now, here's something that until somebody's been in a hiring position, they also don't realize. There are candidates out there who are just straight up mean people. And I've been on the phone with people who the second that I told them that they weren't a fit because my client said they requirement, you need to have, and here's an example, you need to have 2 years of TypeScript knowledge. Well, maybe you've worked with React for a year, you've worked with JavaScript for 2 years, and to you, that would be enough to learn TypeScript. But to my client, they literally said, if they've never worked with TypeScript, I don't want to look at their resume. I'm working for them. And so unfortunately, I have to share that. And I've shared it with people, not that exact example. And people go, no, you're wrong. No, I can learn it. I'm doing this. Just by you giving me that, trying to convince me and tell me why I'm wrong, you're starting to lose and remind me of why you might not be a good fit. So if I've tried to give this feedback to people before and tried to meet them in the middle, yet people are pushing back, unfortunately, I might stop giving that feedback. It's kind of like why you have signs around that say, don't do this. And you're like, who would do that? Well, they put the sign up because somebody actually did do that before, So the other reason that feedback can be tough to come by could be a legal reason. So depending on the state, depending on the country, if the law leans towards the employee, towards the candidate, the company or the recruiter is going to play it safe. They are going to say things like, we've moved forward with other people. Because as much as they would love to give you feedback, their internal policies and rules don't allow them to. Because in the past, somebody sued them. Could have been for a completely ridiculous reason. But nobody likes a lawsuit because that's paperwork, that's time spent. It's just, it's a merry-go-round of unnecessary stuff simply because somebody said you're not a good fit because you don't have experience with this language. You haven't worked this long. And they go, oh, you tell me I haven't worked this long? So apparently I'm too young for this role. I'm too old for this role. Well, I didn't say that, but now you're mincing my words. So once again, they oftentimes, and this is probably where you get a little bit kind of frustrated, is you just hear, we're moving forward with other people. We're moving forward with stronger candidates. Take that with a grain of salt. Sometimes it's true. Sometimes it could be something else. It could be you're not clearly communicating your skills. So let's go through kind of what a recruiter is first, and then we'll talk about kind of what they're not. By definition, they are responsible, and by roles and responsibilities at their company, they're responsible for meeting the hiring goals, and that is going to be done by filling open positions. They are then measured on their ability to fill this role. How quickly are they doing it? How high quality is the candidate? And sometimes companies even look at, has this candidate stayed with this company for a long time? When you're going through your job search, the reason that so many people have these wildly different experiences with recruiters is because they're likely the first person. They're the person who wrote the job description. If they didn't write the job description, then they took it from a hiring manager. Maybe they just took some notes and then put something together. It's also why job descriptions are so poorly written sometimes, is because it wasn't actually done by the person who's doing the hiring or who you're going to report to. They're usually going to be the first person that you also interview with. The reason for this is because a recruiter is likely the only person within a company who's responsible for hiring. So if you're technical, and let's just assume you're developers and you're looking for a developer, a software engineering job, you're going to report to a software engineering manager. But that manager has responsibilities such as meeting with the finance department, meeting with leadership. They have responsibilities for writing out the scope of a project. They have responsibilities for managing their current team members. They also may write some code themselves. And then at the bottom of the list is hiring. So if that manager, who let's say they're making $150,000 a year, is talking to every single candidate that applies, that's a horrible waste of money and time for that company. Now, some managers are really good at it, and they're efficient. They've got their tasks down, but a lot of companies are busy, and they're not going to have that manager do that as the first kind of gatekeeper. So you have a recruiter do it. And the reason you can have a recruiter do it is because a recruiter can do a few things. They can check to see if you're going to be a culture fit. They can check your communication, and they can verify what it is that's on your resume, on your LinkedIn, on your GitHub, to see if it's close to what lines up with the position. This is why you're going to get questions like, how many years of JavaScript experience do you have? Tell me about this project. So for example, as before learning how to code, when I would ask somebody, hey, tell me about the React application that you built. And they just start talking about it from the perspective of, well, it's a to-do list that syncs into calendars. And I also, had some trouble building it, because I was, working with two other developers and we didn't communicate well. That's okay. But I didn't hear anything about React. I didn't hear anything about maybe the use of either hooks or Redux, what you used for the backend, maybe the fact that you needed to use the Google API to connect with the calendars. There was nothing technical there to align with the job description that I'm interviewing for. So one of the best things you can do as a web development, data science, UX, just junior technical candidate is get nerdy. Dive into the technologies. Because recruiters are very rarely going to tell you, I'm sorry, you just went too technical for me. I can't move forward with you. Instead, they're going to think to themselves, wow, TJ is talking like our team does. I'm going to send TJ over to the team members, because when they talk, it goes over my head. When TJ talks, it went over my head. So go into detail about the projects and the experience and the work that you've done. By going into detail, you're confirming what it is that they potentially saw on your resume. And you're also, once again, hitting those buzzwords that they're looking for. But the easy stuff for a recruiter to do on that first phone screen and that first Zoom meeting, in-person meeting, is check to see if you're going to be a culture fit, if you've looked at the job description. And then, of course, sometimes they do ask about your salary expectations and stuff like that. They talk to a ton of people. So this is where, when you take a step back and you say, why haven't they gotten back to me? It's because they have a lot of people reaching out and trying to get their attention, both candidates and internal hiring managers. They're humans. They have emotions. They have feelings. And unfortunately, they also have opinions. So if their opinion is that you should be emailing them back and saying, thanks for your time, sending thank you emails, then they're going to factor that into their decision of moving forward and who would be a good candidate. If they think that people need to have more positive attitude when they're talking on the phone about the company and their experience, that's their opinion, and they're going to move it along. Now, granted, let's circle back around to the first point. If their opinions don't allow the company to hire people and the roles never get filled, that recruiter is probably going to get fired, or they're going to have the conversation with the managers. And then finally, they're getting paid by either their own company or a client. So to this next point, a recruiter is not your personal job guide. They are not working for you. They're working for a client. Now, one of the things we'll talk about later on is the fact that external recruiters, staffing companies, when you do move forward and pass their initial screen, and they do pass your resume along, it's not the Homer Simpson situation, but they do pass it along, now they're going to be on your team because they get paid when you get hired. So they want you to get hired. But of course, you have to pass that initial phone screen. Recruiters aren't technical. So they likely aren't going to be as well versed in the technologies that you're talking to them about that are on the job description. They're going to ask you very vague, basic questions. But if they push back and say, oh, you haven't done this, you haven't done this, unfortunately, that can be at times coming from a position in an area of ignorance. So you kind of need to take it with a grain of salt, because you don't want to piss them off by correcting them and telling them they're wrong. Because once again, they have feelings and emotions, and they can decide if they decide that they don't want to move forward with you. Unfortunately, kind of out of your control. So if needed, let them think what they think. Let them think that they're right. But also don't take it too seriously if they give you a rejection email and say, oh, it's because you don't have Redux experience. You need to go learn Redux. Well, that's their opinion for that one role. It's not a guarantee for every role, that's out there. Recruiters likely aren't talking about you or thinking about you all the time. They're very busy. They're usually working on multiple roles, talking to multiple candidates. Now, if you make a good impression, a recruiter will keep you in mind. So even if you aren't a great fit for the role, but you've been in contact with them, you thank them, you're easy to work with, you answer the phone, you respond promptly to emails, even if that one role doesn't line up, they're going to get more roles down the line. And this is both internal and external recruiters who are, whether it's their own company, maybe they called you about a junior developer role that required 2 years of experience. All of a sudden, they've got an entry-level role. Sweet. You're the person that they're going to reach back out to. They're not paid to get you a job. That's a headhunter. And typically, actually kind of is and isn't a headhunter. That's also a term that gets thrown around a lot. But you can, go out and find, a career coach, or I think there's services that take a percentage of your salary, but you probably don't want that. You have a lot of, information and resources at your disposal. Take advantage of those if possible. They aren't always going to follow up with you. Oh, I'm missing a word. Let's add you there next time. They aren't always going to follow up with you. Think about it like getting a text message from a family member or friend. You read it and you forget to respond. And then it's days later that you go, oh my God, I'm so sorry. You follow up. It happens to all of us. So they're not perfect. They're not always going to follow up with you. So don't take it personally if they don't. What I'd like to coach our students on is, until they've told you you're not a fit, you can follow up with them. You can check in with them. You can say, hey, TJ, it's been a week since I heard back from you. I just wanted to check in and see if that role is still open, if I'm still in consideration. If you've checked in once or twice and haven't heard back, okay, now you move on. But sometimes they're just going to be busy. They're going to forget about it. Personal experience, I had that happen to me just recently. I have a resume pulled up right behind me right now. I need to reach out to this candidate, and I hope that this person is still in the market. I feel horrible that he sent me his resume and I haven't gotten back to him, but there's a lot of stuff that I'm trying to do right now. And then, as we talked about earlier, they're not always going to be honest about the feedback and why you're not a fit. So try to take a step back when you can sometimes to see if you could have done anything differently. Did you show up to the interview on time? Did you send them a thank you email? When you were on the phone, were you your most polite self, or were you maybe a little agitated? By the way, recruiters sometimes will call you based off of your resume that they find online, and they're going to catch you off guard. So don't be afraid to let those calls go to voicemail. That way, it'll give you a chance to look at the job, listen to it, prepare, call them back, and then now you can be ready for that initial phone screen discussion about the position. So internal recruiters are paid by their own company. They're likely, once again, working on multiple roles. So this is also why building those relationships can be important. This is the type of time when you should be asking questions about the company. The more interest you show in the company and in the role, the more likely that recruiter is going to feel about you being a good fit, because hopefully you want to know as much as you can. You're going to spend about 60% of your time each week with that position in that role. So hopefully you have questions about it. Hopefully you have questions about who you're going to be working with, the support that they provide, the activities that the team does, what happens when people face challenges, the training that maybe they offer. Try to think about everything that's important to you and have those questions ready. Internal recruiters are usually working on full-time positions. So occasionally it'll be a contract role, but almost always it's going to be, a full-time position for the company. Now, here's the other thing too, is because somebody has the title recruiter, there's a lot of people sending them LinkedIn connection requests. And a lot of people are kind of taking the easy road and saying, hire me, I want a job. If you can slightly be different than that, if you can say, mention something on their profile, compliment them on, their banner that they have on their LinkedIn, you're going to have an easier time standing out. Some recruiters even go so far as to post and put their email address on their LinkedIn. Shoot them an email. Now you're going outside of the one-click, easy, connection, easy apply on LinkedIn, and you're going to have an easier time getting in connection with them. So staffing companies, there's a lot of them out there. And I wish I had the numbers on Canada, but there's 20,000, over 20,000 that operate in the US alone. And these are companies like Insight Global, Robert Half, Tech Systems, the Judge Group. I believe up in Canada, Eagle, I think is one of the staffing companies, if I can kind of remember. There's a ton of staffing companies out there. So look out for opportunities to work with them. They have a lot of clients and they have a lot of positions that you may never get access to or see because of the fact that it's a contract role. So for example, let's say Microsoft has a team and they're hiring and it's a 6-month project. Microsoft likely isn't going to have their internal team hire people for 6 months and then fire them right afterwards. It's easier to have that as an operational expense and build that into the project budget than it is to be a headcount. So they're going to reach out to a staffing company. They're going to say, hey, Robert Half, I would like you guys to find us 10 software engineers for a 6-month contract. Here's what we can pay you guys. And this is where the spread comes in. So down below, the amount of money that a recruiter makes on a position is the difference between what they're billing the client and then what they're paying you. So one of the reasons you get questions when you're talking to staffing companies about what your hourly rate would be is because they need to find if that's going to fit into the money that and the budget that they have and their client has, and they can make some money off of it. So be ready with a number if possible. You can try to kind of go back and forth and say, well, I'm flexible in this range, but I'd like to hear what you think I'd be a good fit for. But personally, I think for junior developer roles, you want to kind of look at what that market, rate is that you're in. And then easy way for the salary is take the salary, divide it by 2. So let's say the market average for pay is 70,000, 35 an hour is going to be about the equivalent of that. And if you need to add on $1 or $2, because you're obviously going to have to, you're likely going to have to pay for your own, insurance, or you're going to have benefits that aren't covered by, the company. One of the things that I think gets misunderstood about staffing companies and recruiters is the idea that they're only contract positions and they're only part-time. So it's not going to lead to something longer term. 76% of staffing companies roles are full-time positions. Full-time qualifies as 35 hours a week or more. One of the beauties of it too is if you're working over 40 hours, you're likely going to get paid overtime. Love that, because of course that's time and a half in most cases. Now, the other reason that it's a great route to work with staffing companies and recruiters is because a lot of their candidates get converted into full-time employees. And even if So even if 35% are only getting converted into full-time, you've still done good in that 6-month contract. They want to find you another role because they get paid when you get paid. So this is where if you could build up these really good relationships, you can have people finding jobs for you. Once again, we already talked, their technical knowledge is literally limited. And then where you want to be careful of is when they're throwing around this term contract to hire. Contract to hire essentially means you're going to work there for 3 months, 6 months, and then the company's going to convert you to full-time. It sounds exciting, but a lot of staffing companies and recruiters will throw it around to kind of get you more excited about the role when in reality, there's no full-time opportunity. If you can, ask the company when you're talking to them, what are the chances that this goes full-time? You also want to be careful of breaching any contract, because if you're working with the staffing company, you can't talk to the full-time employer about what it is that the staffing company is going to be paying you. So here's the stuff that a lot of people kind of don't know what's going on and may think that a staffing company is being rude or a recruiter is being mean to them, internal, whatever it is. Sometimes they're just waiting on other people. Because this is a process that involves multiple people, things could get delayed. So if a recruiter said that they were going to get back to you by Wednesday and they haven't, there's a chance that simply things at the company got, behind schedule. Check in with them. Follow up with them. They don't have to be the only ones that reach out. As long as you're not demanding anything. Hey, why haven't I heard back? Hey, when's my next interview? But hey, is everything okay? Am I still in consideration for this position? Just checking in with you. Sometimes another role came up and was higher priority. They talked to you on Monday about a developer role. All of a sudden their team comes along and says, we need to fill this network engineering role. And so they have to shift their focus. And once again, they forgot to follow up with you, as well as the other 10 candidates that maybe they were talking to. Obviously, there's going to be other people in the pipeline. So sometimes you're just not maybe their number one choice, but it doesn't mean you should just give up, because the other candidates could get an offer elsewhere. The other candidates could turn down the offer. The other candidates could fail that next interview, and all of a sudden you jump to number one. So try to keep in mind. And then, as we mentioned earlier, some people just make mistakes. There's a lot of other stuff that are going on in the background, and that's why you can follow up and check in with them. If you haven't heard from somebody in a week, or 2 weeks, or whatever it is, I think the only time that you want to wait to follow up is if they did give you a date and it hasn't hit that date yet. So if I interviewed today and the manager said, hey, TJ, we will get back to you next Wednesday, and I follow up on Monday and say, hey, what are we at with things? I wasn't listening. I wasn't being a professional, and my communication and active listening skills aren't that good. So wait until Wednesday. If you haven't heard from them, then reach out Wednesday evening, or late end of the day, or first thing Thursday morning. That's one of the reasons that a great question at the end of the interview is, what are the next steps and when should I expect to hear back? They give you a timeline. You can now hold them to that timeline. Part of the hiring process is going to be that email, phone communication, how quickly you respond, how easy it is to schedule an interview with you, how timely you are for showing up. So make sure you're factoring that in. Even though you may write great code, you may design beautiful applications and web pages, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to get a job, because they're factoring in your soft skills. They're factoring in your culture fit. And as we mentioned earlier, it's really easy for recruiters to check that, to monitor it. They might not be able to dive into your GitHub and look at the quality of your code, but they can look at the quality of your email response. And if you're unprofessional now, while you're trying to supposedly impress us, then what's going to change when you get the job? So be on your best behavior when you're going through these interview processes and emailing and communication, because all of it is being looked at. So final couple of checkpoints. They're not, I like to think of recruiters as a necessary evil. So you want to get used to working with them. And if you go in understanding that some of them aren't going to be the best people or the easiest to work with, it's going to be a lot easier. But don't assume that all recruiters are bad. There are a lot of really good ones. Personally, I think you can identify a good recruiter by somebody who's been in the role for more than 2 or 3 years. If somebody is stuck with that company for that period of time, they know the company really well. They have the manager's trust. Same thing with staffing companies. Recruiters change positions all the time. If they're changing every 6 months, little bit of a red flag. But if they've stayed with that company for a while, they're likely pretty knowledgeable. We've already talked about the fact that their technical knowledge is limited. So the feedback that they give you is also not going to be the end all be all. It's not going to be, you need to do this, and if you do that, you're going to get a job. No, they're thinking about what the role was in front of them, or they're telling you don't have enough experience because that's the safe and easy out. It's easier to do that than to tell somebody that, no, the way that you communicated your project to me wasn't strong enough for the communication that our team expects. No, they're just going to say, hey, you're not a strong enough candidate. We're moving forward with people with more experience. Now, because recruiters have access to so many positions that you may not have access to because they are constantly getting roles, if you can find a good recruiter, hold on to them. It'll be a great relationship. They will appreciate you. I mean, I can still remember some of my favorite contractors. We used to take people out to basketball games, baseball games, happy hours. They're going to do things and they're going to jump through hoops for you because once again, you're helping to make them money. And then finally, as you're going through the interview process, if you get past that initial stage, they want you to get the job, both internally and external, because internal recruiters want to fill that position and move on to the next one. Same thing with external, but external get paid even more. So when you have a recruiter, let's say, that says, hey, TJ, I'm going to pass your resume along to the manager. We're going to set up an interview for this date. They're going to coach you through the interview. They're going to give you tips as to what to prepare for. The second your interview is over, they're going to fight to get feedback. And we've had times where we would actually help the recruiter that overcome any shortcomings in the interview process. So I had feedback sometimes from hiring managers that would say, TJ, I don't think this person has enough experience with XYZ. And I go, no way. We actually talked to them about that. They did that in this role. We have a reference check on this specific position who said that they were at the top of their game. And the manager goes, oh, interesting. I didn't ask about that in the interview. I just kind of assumed, boom, now the person's moving on instead of leaving it up to just that manager. And that's it. Any questions? Everybody loves recruiters.
That was awesome, man. That was like super powerful. I think you kind of really talked about the recruiter side of like what happens on, I sort of like the back office that like people just don't necessarily have access to, and you don't really know like why they're making certain decisions, and it can feel like you're being ghosted. So I actually really liked how your approach on it. Before we open the floor to questions, there was a message in our chat, and I think Matt is on the call as well. And I wanted your take on this. So he got stood up for an interview twice. I don't know if this was a recruiter or if this was the internal hiring team. And like, what should you do when you get like he got not just once but twice? Like, do you write them a message? Do you sort of publicly shame them? Like, what would your recommendation be?
Yeah, so I would avoid publicly shaming because there's a chance that either that company, it's found out, companies see you as simply being somebody who's complaining because they don't have all of the details. Complaining about past managers or coworkers is actually one of the top 3 reasons that companies don't end up moving forward with somebody or considering a candidate, even if it's not your fault. But in Matt's case, there's a couple of things that you kind of want to factor in. And I think probably starting out with, let's start out with an example or an analogy, and you want to compare it to dating. So if you were going to go on a date and the person stood you up, then you would, of course, not be happy with it. But if they followed up and said, hey, I'm so sorry about that. Can we set up a different time? You might be, okay, and kind of understand, because as we were kind of talking about, everybody has lives, things can happen. We don't know what it might end up being. And more likely than not, hiring is not that person's top priority. So there could have been a figurative fire at the company. There could have been a literal fire at the company. And that was the reason that they unfortunately weren't able to reach out. Now, if it's twice, that's a bigger red flag, because even if the company has the best of intentions, that kind of means that there's something with the processes, the organization, the scheduling. It's likely not the most well run. And I say that with a hesitation, because I also don't know who the company is. So the other things that you can do is you can look back for other red flags. How was their communication during the initial setup process? Did they seem professional? Was the job description professionally written? Did the company Glassdoor have positive reviews? Did any of the negative reviews on the company Glassdoor mention the fact that it's disorganized? If it says disorganized in the company Glassdoor and they missed and stood you up over 2 interviews, likely confirmation that it's not good. But I like to say initially play it safe, hope for the best, that they, it was a human error. But if it's 2 of them, then that's kind of where you want to say, you know what, I'm not going to worry about this, because you also don't want to waste your energy thinking about it, being like, how do I burn them? How do I get them back? Instead, just focus on another company. Heck, you could even bring it up and you can say, I hope you don't mind. I really want to make sure that this is the right time for us. I had a company stand me up twice for interviews. I've scheduled time around, I think I saw Matt had a daughter. I've scheduled time around my family. I have a busy schedule. If we can make sure that this is going to work, they're going to be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And they're likely going to make it work.
Yeah, I would even say, as far as like emailing them back and saying like, hey, I noticed that maybe we're missing each other, and just sort of closing the loop and letting them either convince you that like, hey, we're really interested in you, or saying, hey, I'm gonna politely decline. But if you're interested in talking to me, let me know and we can reschedule a better time. But yeah, I think like sometimes it's also a really good telltale of like how they treat their own people if they can't respect your own, like a candidate's time, right? So it's like bullet dodged in a way. Thank you for answering that question. We have some comments in chat. So Ariel, she mentioned that I've been burnt by a staffing agency before. I was hired about to start full time, and then they dropped me for no reason. How can we avoid these situations, and what can we look out for as the red flags?
Yeah. So in this case, the first thing that comes to mind is, did everything go through from the background check, the contract signing? Like, did everything from a paperwork standpoint say that you were going to start on this day? The other thing that, I would kind of, try to, I guess kind of think about is, how was that initial, position described to you? Who was the client? Because sometimes it's not so much the staffing company as it is that client, and the client is simply just not a great organization. If the role is something that's always open. So one of the things we used to work on pretty often were customer service reps for one of the large carriers. I'm not going to name them, but it was a revolving door. So every few months we had to find new people, and it was because the work environment was brutal. The pay wasn't great. And so sometimes the managers would say, hey, we don't have any needs right now. Oh, we have 10 needs. Hey, we don't need those people anymore. And it can be tough, because unfortunately the staffing company is working for that client, and they're going to get paid when that client fills those needs. And if the client's going to have more down the line, the staffing company might have to say, dang, like, we're going to have to let this person know that they can't move forward. I would also think about like how the staffing company handled it. Did it sound like the person was apologetic over the phone? Did they say, hey, Ariel, we're going to look to find another role for you. I really want to make this up to you. If it was simply like an email, that's not professional. But avoiding it, I would look out, once again, Glassdoor is an opportunity. Another thing you can ask too in the interview process is, how long, so if it's a staffing company, how long have you worked with this client, and how many people do you have on site for them? And that's going to give you an idea of the relationship, because if it's the first time that a staffing company is working with a client, the client really doesn't owe them anything. But if the client and the staffing company have been working together for 4 or 5 years, they've got people on site for them, they have people who have been on site for 2 years, 3 years, that's a really good indicator. But It's tough because in this situation, there's a few different layers, to it. Now, once again, I would just mainly base it off of what was communicated to you when the role was pulled. And sometimes, it simply is, hey, our client lost budget. The finance department, shut down this project. We feel really sorry about this. We're going to try to find you something else. Because the other thing too is if Ariel went through the background check process, she passed the interviews, got to that point with the company, then it's going to be really easy for that staffing company to find her another role. Now, if they have no interest in helping her find another role, then it's probably something that the staffing company did.
Yeah, that's interesting. I really liked how you put that in terms of asking the staffing agency the number of years they've been working with the client, because that sort of is a really good telltale of like the relationship that they have, and how much of a sort of ledge are they going to go for you because you're new in their world. They don't have the same relationship, the number of years that they have with the client. So I actually really like what you said.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Well, I noticed that Ariel had a follow-up, which she said that they didn't help afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So that's likely the staffing company is just not professional and not worth working with. Now, that could also just be that recruiter and that account manager. So if the staffing company does ever reach out to you again, you let them know what happened last time, and you say, I can give you guys another shot, but it can't happen again. If it does, go to Glassdoor.
That's fair. I actually have a sort of a question with staffing agencies and individual recruiters. Who would you recommend would be like better to, I guess, newer candidates? To
that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So typically you're going to have better luck as a junior candidate or an entry-level candidate with internal recruiters. And the reason for this is that staffing companies rarely get entry-level roles. And if they do, they're going to be positions that maybe you're not interested in. So for example, you might have just graduated a web development boot camp. You're looking for developer roles. They reach out to you about a technical support role. Well, they see you have technical skills. It's an entry-level position or it's a junior position. So they reach out, but you don't want that kind of stuff. Because hiring an entry-level developer is likely going to be a full-time position, not a contract. You've immediately kind of ruled that out. Then you want to think about how many candidates are out there. So a company who may post, let's go, up north. Let's say Rogers is hiring for an entry-level developer. Rogers isn't going to have a hard time finding candidates. They're going to post something. They're going to send something maybe to, University of Toronto and say, hey, share this with some of your students. They're going to get a lot of applications. So there's no reason for them to pay a staffing company to either find somebody for a placement fee that they're going to have to pay 30% of that salary, or for the contract, difference. So for entry-level positions, mostly internal. Now, you still want to entertain the idea of talking to recruiters and staffing companies, because I also think, and I forgot to mention this, it gives you practice interviewing. It gives you a chance to talk about your coding skills, a project that you've worked on, answering questions that they may have. And then the other thing you want to do when you're working with staffing companies is tell them everything you're open to. So as a recruiter, they could only be thinking about you as a React developer. Yet in reality, you might be open to Node-related positions, MySQL or Postgres positions, and they're only looking at React. They put you in the bucket of React developer. So if you tell them, hey, I'm open to this. By the way, I'm also open to working in, I'm going to keep trying here. I know you called me about a position in Richmond. I'm open to actually commuting to Mississauga if I need to, or I'm even open to moving across the country. The more you give them to work with, the more they're going to be able to keep an eye out for other positions.
So there's a common misconception that our community is Canadian. I promise you our community is global. So just for reference, Rogers is like Verizon, and Mississauga to Richmond is like New York to New Jersey.
Yep. That was good. Okay. I'll throw in some more US references.
No worries. No worries. I love this. I think there's a lot of good questions that maybe we're just not even getting yet. Guys, I did open up the mic. So feel free to jump in and just ask TJ a question directly.
Yeah, I think Rocky had one. It was, is it more important to connect with senior recruiters on LinkedIn or are all levels of a recruiter still good to connect with? So senior recruiters, as I mentioned earlier, are going to have a little bit more experience with the company. They're likely going to be better at their job. If you think about like when you first got into your own position, like it took you a while to get on top of your email and your tasks and giving good feedback and being professional and holding, the deadlines that you had originally set for yourselves. So senior recruiters are more likely, not guaranteed, to be a little bit better at that. But senior recruiters are also more likely to be working on more difficult positions because, once again, the toughest part about hiring is finding kind of that needle in the haystack. Most people here are entry-level candidates. And so connecting with anybody is a better approach because the senior recruiter could be working on a senior DevOps role that happens to have this, and this industry experience. But a junior recruiter may be working on entry-level developers, customer service. Like when we started at our old company, most people would start by working on a position that was customer service related, tech support, because you know what they're doing. Like if I, in week 1 of my staffing career, had been working on a senior networking engineer, I would have been so lost, it would have been ridiculous. But when I'm talking to customer service people, I know what's to be expected for a customer service person. So kind of going off of that, when you're connecting with people on LinkedIn and especially at a company, I think you should be sending out at least 5 to 10 connection requests because recruiters are getting a lot of connection requests. They're also busy. So why not go outside of the recruiter and hit up some of the engineers on the team? And then if you think about the fact that engineering managers are kind of clearly the decision maker, they're likely getting a lot of connection requests. So talk to the senior engineers, talk to the junior engineers, because they can, at the very, very least, tell you what it's like to work there, tell you what the process is like. They can give you little tidbits of information.
Love it, man. You're spitting out gold here. I hope everyone's taking some notes.
Is that why my stomach hurts? Yeah, I think that the hiring process is tough because unfortunately, more often than not, you're hearing no, you're hearing you don't have enough experience. You're reading job descriptions that say entry level. I don't know if anybody saw this recent LinkedIn, news, but they did, I think it was either the Wall Street Journal or Forbes or someone did a study and they found entry-level roles and the majority are like 40 or 50% of them have 3+ years of experience as a requirement. So it's clear that people aren't good at writing job descriptions, but you also want to factor in that 3 years is not often a hard requirement. Take a shot at it, apply. Now don't spend an hour applying, but apply and then go back to finding some of those, entry-level positions. Personally, my favorite roles are the ones that don't have years listed. If there's no years listed, then that's a company who is flexible with it, who is fairly realistic about what they're looking for. And then final note about the years is even if a year, it says 5 years, but they have JavaScript, React, HTML, CSS, all the stuff you've worked with, that means it's a company that could employ you because even though you might not be a fit for that senior level role at this time, when they have an entry level role or an internship, you could already be in their database.
That's fair. Either you've been really good and nobody has a question, or we're holding on to these questions, guys. Feel free to jump in. I'm going to say that again.
I've been reached out by recruiters and then one recently, but I don't want to go into too much detail since this is being broadcasted on YouTube.
Yeah, no worries.